In a kingdom where loyalty was everything, Alexander and Victor had a friendship like no other. They grew up together side by side, facing every challenge, winning every battle. They were more than friends. They were brothers. Alexander, a man of honor and strength, stood tall, while Victor's closest ally stood beside him. Together they conquered kingdoms. Their names were known, respected, feared by all. But as time passed, things began to change. The more victories they achieved, the more power and temptation crept into their hearts. Even though Alexander trusted Victor completely, something dark was stirring inside his friend. The bond they once shared, unbreakable, eternal, began to weaken. And then, a quiet storm began brewing in Victor's heart. One stormy night, Alexander returned to the castle, expecting the usual cheers and celebrations for his victory. But instead, he was met with silence. Something was wrong. He hurried to the throne room only to find Victor, the one person he trusted most, kneeling before the king. Victor had betrayed him. The king mocked Alexander, saying, "Victor has always been the one destined for the throne." The shock hit Alexander like a thunderclap. The man who had fought by his side, who had shared every victory and defeat, had turned against him not for wealth, not for power, but for something much darker, the throne. As Victor looked at Alexander, there was no regret in his eyes, only a cold, insatiable hunger. It was a wound deeper than any sword, and in that instant, Alexander's world shattered. Days passed, but the betrayal never left Alexander's mind. His grief soon turned into anger, and with that anger came a thirst for revenge. He gathered his soldiers, preparing for war, ready to take back everything he had lost. As the army stood ready, whispers spread among his men. They spoke of the once noble leader who now seemed on the edge of madness. Alexander fought with fury, but his mind was distracted. His heart still ached with the weight of what Victor had done. The real enemy wasn't on the battlefield, it was the battle within himself. Amidst the chaos, Alexander stood still for a moment, lost in thought. Was this revenge worth it? Was he willing to let his anger control him forever? It was in that quiet moment, as the fire of battle raged around him, that Alexander realized the fight for redemption was one he had to face within his own soul. The night before battle, Alexander stood outside the war tent, watching his soldiers prepare for the fight. Their chants filled the air, and the energy was electric, but Alexander's mind was elsewhere. He had always been a man of principle, but now, after the betrayal by Victor, he wasn't sure if his honor could withstand the weight of revenge. A voice came from behind him. It was his trusted general, urging him, "Strike Victor down, restore your honor by punishing the traitor." But Alexander hesitated. His hand hovered over his sword, but something inside him recoiled. Could he truly do this? Was his honor worth losing himself to rage? The moment was heavy with silence, and as the winds blew around him, Alexander realized that the battle ahead wasn't just with the enemy, it was within himself. At dawn, the battle began. The clash of swords echoed across the field, and Alexander led his men with precision, cutting through the enemy ranks. But despite his sharp focus on the battle, his mind kept wandering to Victor. The man who had once fought beside him now stood on the opposite side, leading his own forces. Alexander's heart burned with anger, but something stopped him from fully embracing the hatred he felt. Was he really prepared to destroy the man who had once been his brother? He couldn't shake the memory, their shared victories, their laughter after battles before everything had changed. As the enemy king approached, Alexander tightened his grip, preparing to strike. But before he could act, something unexpected happened. A rider appeared in the distance. It was Victor. Walking toward him, the battlefield paused. Alexander's eyes locked with his former friend. Could he really trust him again? Or was this just another lie? Victor stood before Alexander, his armor battered, his face full of regret. There was no arrogance in his eyes now, no ambition, only sorrow. He admitted the truth. "I betrayed you, Alexander." His voice wavered. "Blinded by the throne I once coveted, I lost sight of everything that mattered." Now, in the quiet aftermath of battle, Victor had come to ask for forgiveness. His voice trembled as he spoke, confessing the terrible mistake he had made. Alexander stood in silence, his heart torn between anger and disbelief. Could he really forgive the man who had caused him so much pain? The silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Victor didn't expect Alexander to forget what he had done, but he begged, "Let me make it right, please." For the first time, there was no manipulation in Victor's eyes, only genuine regret. The decision lay with Alexander. Could he forgive, or would the wounds of betrayal be too deep? The night was thick with tension, as Alexander and Victor stood face to face by the crackling campfire. The air was filled with unspoken words, the weight of betrayal hanging between them. Victor, humbled and broken, asked for forgiveness, his voice shaky with a mix of fear and hope. Alexander, his mind racing, had to make a choice. Could he truly forgive the man who had shattered his world? Could he trust Victor again? The fire flickered, casting long shadows over the two men, and Alexander's hand hovered over his sword. His anger screamed for vengeance, but something within him recoiled. Was forgiveness the right choice? Or would he regret letting the man who betrayed him back into his life? After a long pause, Alexander made his decision. "You will fight beside me, Victor," he said, his voice steady. The decision was made. Redemption could only be earned on the battlefield, but trust would take time. The battle raged with full force, and Alexander fought like a man possessed, his blade cutting through the enemy with expert precision. But as he fought, his mind kept returning to Victor. Was he truly fighting alongside him, or was this all part of some deeper plan? Victor fought with honor, with a fire in his eyes that reminded Alexander of the man he once knew. The enemy forces began to falter, but it wasn't the enemy king Alexander feared anymore. It was the storm within his own heart. As the enemy king approached, Alexander prepared to strike, but for a fleeting moment, his eyes locked with Victor's across the chaos of the battlefield. In that moment, Alexander realized that the true battle was not with the enemy, it was within himself. Could he truly forgive Victor, or would he let the past destroy any chance of redemption? With the enemy defeated and the battlefield quieting, Alexander stood amidst the ruins of war. Victory had come at a great cost, and yet an emptiness lingered inside him. He had forgiven Victor, but what did that really mean? Had he truly let go of the pain, or was it just buried beneath the surface? He found Victor at the edge of the field, standing alone. "We've won," Victor said, his voice distant. "But I feel like I've lost everything." Alexander stepped forward, his voice gentle. "You've lost nothing," he replied softly. "The road to redemption isn't easy, but the price of forgiveness isn't in the battles we fight, it's in the battles we choose to let go." Victor's eyes filled with emotion as he asked, "Then, you forgive me?" Alexander's answer was steady, though his heart was torn. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, it makes us human. The two men stood there, side by side, knowing that their journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, there was peace. The battlefield was still, the sounds of war now replaced by the soft murmurs of the wounded and the quiet rustling of soldiers tending to the fallen. The victory banners waved in the wind, but Alexander's heart felt heavy, filled with a strange emptiness. The kingdom had been saved, but at what cost? He stood at the edge of the battlefield, staring at the horizon, wondering if he had truly forgiven Victor, if peace was even possible after all that had happened. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the carnage, a quiet voice broke the silence. It was Victor, walking toward him, his steps slow but steady. His armor was battered and bloodied, and there was no longer any sign of the ambitious man who had betrayed Alexander. Instead, there was humility in his eyes. "I don't expect you to forget what I've done, Victor said, his voice full of regret. "But I've lost everything, Alexander. I destroyed what truly mattered." Alexander didn't speak right away. The silence between them was thick with the weight of the past. But then, with calm resolve, he said, "You are right. You lost everything. But I was not the only one who paid the price." The air between them seemed to soften, the tension fading as Alexander offered his forgiveness. The weight of revenge and anger lifted from his heart, replaced by something far stronger peace. Victor, his eyes filled with emotion, dropped to one knee, vowing to serve with honor. Alexander extended his hand, pulling him up. "There's no need for oaths," he said softly. "What's done is done. The future is what we make of it." The two men, once divided by betrayal, now stood side by side brothers once more. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but together they would rebuild what had been broken, and in time, the kingdom would learn that even the deepest betrayal couldn't extinguish the light of true forgiveness.